planted this vineyard in 2006, 2008 and 2010. We've lived in Tillington for about 20 years, which is the village you can see behind. And we live here. It's a family-run business. My son works as the vineyard manager. I work in the vineyard doing various jobs. And so also the girls work in the shop, do some of the selling. We produce an English sparkling wine, which is quite a light wine. It's got a lot of fruit in it. We like our Pinot grapes because they tend to give it quite a fruity flavour to it. So we have Pinot Noir, which is one of the red grapes, Pinot Meunier, which is another red grape, and Chardonnay, which is the white grape. And out of those we can make white sparkling wine, and we can also make a rosé by making some red wine out of the red grapes. Generally that style of wine is to have fairly young wines that are quite fresh, quite fruity. So they're not too dry, because a lot of people don't like sparkling wines that are really dry. Some people do, a lot of people don't. So a lot of people come in and buy our wine and are quite surprised that it isn't too dry. So we really like those ourselves, and we find that people really like that style of wine. It's a fantastic spot. The slope that you can see sloping down, heading towards the downs, is just fantastic. It helps with the frost. We don't get a real problem with frosts here at all in April and May, which sometimes can be a problem for some vineyards. We have a lovely dry soil, so we don't have the problem of driving tractors and machines about and making ruts in the vineyard, because generally it's quite a dry place to work. The vines like it because the ground's dry. They like to have their feet dry. They don't like being sat in water at all. So really it's a really good place to have a vineyard. And also that's also borne out by the fact that just along next door is Nye Timber, and they have about 180 acres of vineyards on exactly the same piece of ground, but about a quarter of a mile away. So it really is a great spot, produces fantastic wine, and maybe you should come and try some.
I'm James, I'm Andy's son, I'm the vineyard manager. I've been working here since 2008. We've seen quite a lot of extra planting since then. When I first joined there was only one main vineyard, and now we have two others. The original vineyard in 2005 was a bit of a trial experiment. Dad planted 800 vines by hand, and they consisted of Pinot Noir Precoce, which is an early ripening Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and also a grape called Rondo. And it's the Pinot Noir Precoce and the Rondo that make up the colour in our rosé. And so in 2008 we had our first rosé, and Rondo's actually got red juice. And so when it was pressed, although it was made like a white wine, the red juice from the Rondo gave it this lovely peach colour. It was the first year's harvest, and 2008 wasn't a particularly good year for growing grapes, and so we only had a few hundred bottles. Moving into 2009, we had a slight change of direction, and we made some red wine out of the Rondo and the Pinot Noir Precoce, and then we blended it with Chardonnay. And so you end up with a fairly dark rosé, where the red wine was obviously dark, but the extra colour from the Rondo has given it a really deep colour. And then the 2010 is a little bit in the middle. This bottle isn't finished at the moment, it still has the sediment in, so it's still aging in the cellar. But we've used a little bit less of the red wine, just to give it a slightly lighter colour. So in terms of the whites that we produce, this is our main one. It's called Nebula, and the reason is because we get fantastic mists on the downs and in front of the downs during autumn, and they really sort of typify the area. And so we wanted to have something that represented the place that we were growing in and not have generic names. And so Nebula is the sort of flagship of our cuvées, and it's 67% Pinot Noir and 33% Chardonnay. And all our wines have got a style where they're quite fruit forward. They've only got light yeasty flavours, and so although we age them in the cellar for 2 years, we're going for a wine that's quite approachable and perhaps not as austere as many champagnes. That is the 2009 blend, and 2010 There is a wine called Aurora that we're releasing, and that is made of 67% Chardonnay and 33% Pinot Noir. So there's a lot more Chardonnay in the Aurora than there is in the Nebula, and we're hoping that as we age the Chardonnay and the sort of acidity softens, that we'll end up with a beautifully rounded, sort of slightly buttery flavour to work along with the brioche yeasty flavours that will develop in the cellar. In the 2011 vintage, we're going to have a Blanc de Blanc as well. So we'll have some of the Nebula, some of the Aurora, and also a Blanc de Blanc.